I'm here again with Ignotus Amicus, friend of the show, and in light of the recent SSPX controversy, I thought, Ignotus, you would be good to have on. You attended a SSPX parish for quite some time, didn't you?
Well, yeah. So when my family, so let's say I was just freshly starting my nursing career when my father relocated the rest of my family to Virginia. And the following year, the SSPX was doing the cornerstone consecration and the consecration of the bells for the seminary. And so I took some time off and had come and came down and joined my family, and it was an incredibly edifying experience. And that was in 2013. So now I, of course, after the weekend, drove back up to Pennsylvania to resume work, and my family continued on in Virginia until they finally began to open the chapel for a public congregation. I believe they finally started allowing for public masses at the seminary about a year or two later. And so in 2018, I moved to Virginia to help care for my ailing grandfather. And that's where my family has been attending ever since. My wife and I, we were married by with the assistance of a society priest who also happens to be one of the professors at the seminary. So you could say we are we are heavily invested in their mission, since we have benefited all these years from their lack of compromise on the basics. So
Okay. How's that place doing in the wake of this?
well, I haven't well, right now it's rather empty because they're all in a cone.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
all in
like,
France.
yeah. There's a few of the brothers and probably a few of the sisters who are holding down the hatches while everyone's away until they all come back, and I fully expect to see Bishop Goldadi and Bishop Hanapi in the coming weeks or so, since they both are like, well, Michael Goldadi is like one of the rector of the seminary, or was. I don't know if he'll retain I don't know if he'll retain that being a bishop now. And then now Bishop Hanapier also was one of the professors at the seminary. I've He has said mass a few times, but I'm not as familiar with him, and his broken English is very French.
So, in your experiences with PX congregants or clergy, how are they reacting to the latest news from Rome?
Well, and I haven't yet been the I've only been back up that way for mass this past Sunday. So I have not yet made my return, and unfortunately this Sunday I will be on duty at the nursing home. So for me, unfortunately, the mass is a biweekly basis. So I am actually interested to see when I do make it back for a Sunday mass, to see if it's still standing room only, which it has been for years, or if there will be more room in the pews compared to usual. So time will tell. I do look forward to to seeing some of the fathers there, and hope, and I'm also really excited to touch base with the priest who helped marry my wife and I, to maybe inquire of him. And for all I know, he's going to be one of the spiritual fathers for their summer retreat that starts next week. So that's where I'm going to be for 6 days, total silence. Me and 27 others for a traditional Ignatian retreat. And as I understand it, I've been told it's their Ignatian retreats are some of the best.
So, the SSPX, obviously, the bishops that were ordained have been excommunicated, which many of us were expecting. What was not expected was the extent to which the laity is also implicated.
Mm,
The amount of just regular people, families that are now having to relocate, that are going to have to explain to their children if they end up leaving the SPX, explaining why they're suddenly in a vastly different liturgical service in a vastly different community with vastly different values. Do you know, it's still somewhat unclear, the news is still breaking, what the process is for the different types of laity excommunications that have come from Rome? What's the process for, say, your average churchgoer?
mm. So I just want to offer as a preamble, I am not a canon lawyer, but I do try to keep abreast of some of the latest analysis and nuances that are commented upon by people who are more knowledgeable, including the analysis of the society itself, as well as others who are not formerly attached to them. And as far as how it will likely come upon the laity is a really good question, mainly because one of the requirements for the validation of a late sententiae excommunication, as far as I understand, has to do with the decree that is written requires the naming of the individual. So I don't know how much paper and I don't know how much ink the Vatican has at its disposal in order to publish the names of the hundreds of thousands to possibly the million faithful who have benefited from the society in one way, shape, or form all over the world, possibly even including numbers in Africa that we just do not have statistics for, which, speaking sarcastically, may require the Vatican to draw up a contract with flock cameras, maybe, in order to figure out where all the faithful are going every Sunday.
Yeah, I in a private discussion with you before recording this, I brought up 600,000 SSPX parishioners across the
Mhm,
world, and you said that's the known numbers. It very well maybe double that,
mhm,
which again just highlights the absurdity of, I mean, to me, this is perhaps more extreme than anything Francis has done under his pontificate. Because say what you will about the style and tenor of Francis,
mhm,
um, he never kicked, despite his disagreements with traditionalists, he never kicked the laity out of the church. To me, that's, I mean, just a remarkable development. It's the most extreme development since the original Lefebvre ordinations.
mhm. Yeah, not to mention, well, I would say sort of tied up with, and this is one of the faults on Fernandez's part. Again, as far as I can understand, one of his faults that he commits in his decree is packing a whole lot into an explanatory note that is technically not a part of the decree itself. And within the explanatory note happens to also cite the canons that the society invokes to justify the consecration of bishops. And but of course, in Tucho's case, he's applying the lack of penalty of automatic excommunication that is afforded by those canons onto the laity, sort of as like a little, I guess, a little cop out to avoid having to again publish millions of names in a decretal of some sort. And quite honestly, the fact that Fernandez has put that loophole in his own decree, this is why the Superior General just today was fairly, I would imagine that he probably noticed this too. Best guess, that's just speculation. But he released a letter today where he's like, well, it's the penalties are invalid, which the specific canons cited are the ones that the society has used to justify just about everything aside from the consecrations that they do, whether it's all the way down to the ordinations. So it's a decree that is clear as mud as far as I understand it.
Yeah, weaponized ambiguity is a popular term I've heard of in
Yeah.
traditional Catholic circles. Yeah, it's
Yes.
to me it's a very deep irony that the whole notion of a late sententiae excommunication is not something taken particularly seriously by the vast majority of, say, Novus Ordo Catholics who probably hold views contrary to church teaching on a number of issues and yet still receive communion every weekend.
Hmm.
Out of the entire church, the people that take canon law the most seriously and with the most devotion and dedication, they're the ones punished to where they need to write a professio fide and subscribe their name to a long list. I mean, this is almost like, who's that character in Harry Potter? Dolores Umbridge. It's a
Mm-hmm.
deeply unpleasant, it's a very Orwellian development, and it does seem like in the aftermath of everything, everyone is very discombobulated. There's not really a clear statement in terms of all the big figures, Taylor Marshall, Timothy Gordon, Michael Matt, all of the traditional Catholic sort of squad are walking away with radically different takes because I think really this set off a shockwave perhaps deeper and graver than the shockwave of Traditionis Custodes. Traditionis Custodes, say what you will about it, it was not an attack against the lives of the traditionalists who are now going to have to relocate and find different parishes, many of them.
If they take the decree seriously.
And I hope that there is good resistance. One of the arguments I heard from Timothy Gordon that I thought was quite interesting was when it comes to the process of dialogue from here on out, if we could call this process dialogue, there there needs to be an established ground of communal belief in certain controversial areas between the clergy of the SSPX and Rome. And among these will be the interpretation of Vatican II documents. So Timothy Gordon raised a great point where, well, this is a great opportunity actually to establish are the interpretations of the Vatican II documents in line with tradition prior to Vatican II. If they're not, then obviously the SSPX professes a different faith because the faith cannot change. So that's one perhaps positive outcome out of this whole process.
It's been a while since I've last caught an episode of Rules for Retrogrades, but I do think that that is the can of worms that regardless regardless of whether or not the society had received papal mandate for the consecrations, inevitably, no matter which way we go, the the questions of interpretation and hermeneutics surrounding the documents of Vatican II and what they do or do not teach is and has been since Marcel Lefebvre's time one of the primary concerns, which the mass is merely an expression of, which is one of the reasons why Lefebvre was adamant in maintaining the traditional mass, because it's over the vast centuries of the church in the liturgy's organic development, it has been honed to the point to where it expresses everything a faithful Catholic would hold. So yeah, it's never been strictly about aesthetic preferences, much to the FSSP and Institute of Christ the King's chagrin. and but it was only a matter of time, regardless of the path taken, that these questions would end up having to be addressed head on, and whether or not it's going to happen within the next 20 years that the sit down finally happens, the most meaningful sit down finally happens. I'm not holding my breath, because whether it occurs in my lifetime or not, I can only do what I can for for my own soul.
That's
And
a great mentality, by the way. I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime. That's inspirational because that is the mindset that traditionalists unfortunately must have. Things happen very slowly. I think we should take a quick smoke break and we'll return in 5 minutes. How's that sound?
yep, that sounds good.
I'm back with Ignotus Amicus. During the break, we were talking about history with the Latin Mass, and I wanted to bring up the point that when I first discovered the Latin Mass, my first reaction, I did not know anything about the history or the controversy surrounding the Latin Mass. I was not familiar with any e-celebrities or anything of this nature. Rather, I only attended because the mainline parishes were closed during COVID. And my first reaction upon entering the Latin Mass was obviously awe because it was a low Mass and it was beautiful. But the second one was immediately a visceral anger because I realized that had this beautiful service been a part of my life prior to this point in time, my life would have entered upon a different trajectory. It is a very important, what's important about the Mass isn't just its beauty, it's its sanctity. The this is something that's incommunicable until one actually steps foot inside of a traditional parish.
Absolutely. And and with that, we look to the mainstream clergy, and we have to ask ourselves, is that what the mainstream clergy demonstrate? Is that how they conduct themselves? And this is just a portion of the crisis that the society has can easily point to, and any layman can point to. And so for me, some of the things that hurt the most deeply, especially nowadays, especially over the last few years, has been just the seeming reluctance to recognize that there is something wrong, and that the thing that is wrong is as deep seated as the to be to open the question of the personal holiness of the very people who are supposed to shepherd us. Just gosh, just what, this past week or so, this past week or so, up in at Georgetown University, Cardinal McElroy celebrated what can only really be described as like a pride mass, like an abject pride mass, where the majority of those who attended, one could say, fall under the James Martin theology. He's a cardinal. I mentioned in our first video our first podcast we did together, I mentioned where we were once attending the Latin Mass at an indult parish just outside of Pittsburgh. And the archbishop of the diocese at the time is now Cardinal Wuerl. And all it took was one appearance on Mother Angelica by our parish chaplain to have the entire indult Latin Mass completely axed. And yeah, my family has been in that situation where where you effectively, for moral reasons, lose your parish. The parish my family was attending before we started to discover the Latin Mass, our family, for 3 generations, had attended that parish. And for moral reasons related to sound doctrine and teaching, we had to leave. And so when that Latin Mass community in Pittsburgh at St. Boniface was disbanded, it was years before we found another place. And we just, for reasons of moral impossibility, could not bring ourselves to go to a Novus Ordo parish, not necessarily for reasons of out of a despisement of the new mass, but because we knew from experience that there was no guarantee in a Novus Ordo parish that you would receive sound catechesis in the faith. And so when it was announced that the new seminary was going to be built in Dilwyn, right around the same time my father had gotten a job offer in the area, and it was hard it, it was hard not to look at that and deny God's hand in it. So now my family has that stability that for years we had sought to find. And we have resolved ourselves that come whatever storm, this is where we know we will be given sound catechesis. This is where we can guarantee that we will be strengthened in our spiritual life and in our own spiritual battles. I carried my grandfather's casket into the cemetery on the seminary grounds. My family officially now their blood waters the soil there now. For us, it's keeping the faith and access to the sacraments are everything. And even if Fernandez wishes to attempt to convince everyone that the society's sacraments are invalid, again, I would cite the same canons that Fernandez himself cites in his explanatory note, which he applies to the faithful on the question of formal adherence to the SSPX. A state of necessity exists. A crisis exists. And in light of such a crisis, those canons and the provisions it affords for no penalty being legally permissible, and in addition to, I think it's Canon 844, Section 2, allows for any faithful to attend the sacraments from schismatics under, if there is a moral impossibility that they would be unable to receive it from a Catholic minister. Because at the end of the day, if for all of the legalists out there, at the very end of the 83 code is the canon which reads that the purpose of all the canons is to provide for the salvation of souls. Hence why there are these handful of canons that give the faithful the means in extraordinary circumstances to obtain those sanctifying graces of which they desperately need. And so long as they don't change the code and turn it into some kind of monstrosity, those canons still stand. And unfortunately for Fernandez and the Vatican, those provisions do operate under a subjective standard. In fact, the canons the society cites to justify their actions actually does mention that the state of necessity does not have to be real. It can be perceived.
It's a very depressing conversation, unfortunately. What do you think? How do you foresee this going in the future?
I actually had this conversation with one of my sisters yesterday, as it happens. I see two possibilities. One, I don't know how likely is. The other is probably the most likely. So I'll start with the least likely one, by my estimation. Okay, now, this is my opinion. The least likely possibility that I can foresee is that the society seeks canonical appeals officially in order to bring all of this to bear within a canonical court, which which would effectively throw the spotlight in almost a surgical manner to the hypocrisy, the self-contradiction, and the absurdities of Fernandez's decree. I say it's the least likely because the Vatican is going to drag its feet, as it always does when dealing with the society since the dawn of the society, which unfortunately leaves us with the most likely scenario, which is probably the more worrisome to me, but it may eventually prove to demonstrate this. It might end up the same way that bringing it to the canonical courts would bring to light all of these gross logical fallacies and irrational errors. But I think it's more likely that Pope Leo will change canon law, and we will have a 2026 or 2027 code of canon law, possibly to coincide with some synodality document of some kind. And within this speculative new code, it would be the most severe, the most stringent, which would ironically be the least synodal of canon of codes of law in the church's history.
Yeah, clearly.
Because even like if you look at the 17 code, the 1917 code, compare it to the 83 code, the 83 code is actually more stringent than the 1917 code. So I can only imagine what a 2026 code of canon law would be.
Tragic times. Ignotus, it was great to have you on, and hopefully things get better, and we'll see in the upcoming weeks and months.
Oh, absolutely. You know where I'll be.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.